Take a moment to settle wherever you are. If you are walking or driving, let your body move naturally. If you are still, let your shoulders drop. Breathe out slowly. What you are about to hear is not a message that the past does not matter. The past matters enormously. What happened to you was real. The pain was real. The losses were real. The people who hurt you, the decisions you regret, the versions of yourself you wish had chosen differently. All of it was real. This audiobook does not ask you to pretend otherwise. It asks something far more demanding and far more rewarding. It asks you to understand, with precision, what the past is still costing you in the present, and to learn, through methods that have been studied and validated, how to stop paying that price. There are 7 chapters. Each one addresses a distinct mechanism by which the past keeps its grip, and each one provides tools verified by research to loosen that grip and redirect your energy toward the life that is still ahead of you. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Neuroscience of Being Stuck. Why the Brain Holds On. Before we can talk about letting go, we have to understand why letting go is so extraordinarily difficult. Because if it were easy, you would have done it already. The difficulty is not a character flaw. It is a feature of how the human brain processes threatening and emotionally significant events. And until you understand that feature, you will keep blaming yourself for something that is fundamentally neurological. How traumatic and painful memories are encoded differently by the brain. The brain does not store all memories equally. Ordinary memories, what you ate for breakfast last Tuesday, the route you drove to work 3 weeks ago, are encoded through the hippocampus and filed into long-term storage in a relatively neutral, factual format. Over time, they fade. Details blur. The emotional charge dissipates. Emotionally significant and threatening memories are processed differently. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, sometimes called the alarm system, is activated during high stress, high fear, or deeply painful experiences. When the amygdala is activated, it releases stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, which in turn strengthen the encoding of the memory. The brain essentially says, "This was dangerous. Record everything." The result is a memory that is encoded with unusual clarity, emotional intensity, and sensory detail, and one that does not fade naturally the way ordinary memories do. This is why a painful rejection from 15 years ago can feel immediate and vivid when triggered, while a pleasant afternoon from the same period has blurred entirely. The brain prioritized the threat. Researcher Bessel van der Kolk, whose work with trauma survivors spans decades, documented this in his landmark research. The body and brain do not distinguish clearly between a remembered threat and a present one. When a traumatic or painful memory is activated by a smell, a sound, a person, a phrase, a situation that echoes the original, the nervous system responds as though the original event is happening again. Heart rate elevates, breathing changes, stress hormones release. The past is experienced as the present. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. But it means that simply telling yourself to let go without addressing the neurological encoding will never work. You cannot think your way out of a physiological response. The rumination trap. For many people, the mechanism that keeps the past alive is not dramatic flashback. It is the quieter, more constant process of rumination. Rumination is the repetitive, passive focusing on distress and its causes. It is the mental replay of painful events, conversations, regrets, and grievances, not to solve them, but simply because the mind cannot stop returning to them. Susan Nolan Hoxema, a Yale psychologist who spent decades studying the effects of rumination, found that it is one of the strongest predictors of depression and that it actively prolongs emotional distress rather than resolving it. Contrary to the intuition that replaying painful events helps process them, Her research consistently showed the opposite. The more people ruminated, the worse they felt, and the longer the distress lasted. Rumination is not processing. It is rehearsal. Every time you replay the event, you reactivate the amygdala and re-encode the emotional memory with fresh intensity. You are not resolving the pain, you are deepening the neural groove that leads back to it. Practical step: the rumination interrupt. The first practical tool addresses rumination directly, using a technique validated in cognitive behavioral therapy research. It is called the rumination interrupt, and it works on a simple neurological principle. The brain cannot sustain two competing cognitive tasks simultaneously. When you notice that your mind has begun the familiar loop, replaying the conversation, revisiting the decision, rehearsing the grievance, immediately engage in a task that requires active verbal or numerical processing. The options are specific. Call someone and have a real conversation. Solve a simple arithmetic problem in your head, not a calculator, your head. Read a paragraph of text aloud. Write a list of 10 specific things you can see in the room you are in. Each of these tasks uses the same neural resources that rumination uses. The loop cannot run in parallel with active verbal or numerical processing. The interrupt breaks the cycle. This is not a cure. It is a circuit breaker. Use it every time you notice rumination starting, consistently for 3 weeks. Research by Nolan Hoeksema and colleagues found that consistent use of cognitive interrupt techniques measurably reduces both the frequency and duration of rumination episodes within that time frame. Chapter 2: The Unfinished Business Problem. What closure actually is and how to create it. One of the most common reasons people cannot move forward is that they are waiting for something from the past that the past cannot deliver. They are waiting for an apology that will never come, for an explanation that will never be given, for recognition of harm that will never be acknowledged, for a relationship to be repaired that the other person has no interest in repairing. They are waiting, in other words, for closure, and they have defined closure as something that requires the participation of the person or situation that caused the harm. This is one of the most psychologically costly misunderstandings about how healing actually works. What the research says closure actually requires. Psychologist Ari Kruglansky, who developed the need for cognitive closure theory, defines closure as the mind's need for a definite answer, any answer, rather than continued ambiguity. The need for closure is not a need to feel good about what happened. It is a need for the mind to stop holding the question open. Open questions consume cognitive resources. An unresolved painful situation occupies working memory in the same way an unsaved document occupies your computer's RAM. It cannot be fully filed away until the question is closed. This is why intrusive thoughts about unresolved situations arise so persistently. The brain is repeatedly flagging the open file, asking for resolution. The critical finding from this body of research is that closure can be created internally, without the participation of the other party. The mind does not require a specific answer from a specific source. It requires that the question be settled to a point where the person can assign meaning and move forward, and that is entirely within your own capacity. The expressive writing protocol. One of the most rigorously tested methods for creating internal closure is expressive writing, a protocol developed by social psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas in the 1980s, and subsequently replicated in over 200 independent studies across 20 countries. The protocol is specific. For 4 consecutive days, you write for 20 minutes per day about the most emotionally significant, painful experience you are carrying. You write about your deepest thoughts and feelings, not what happened, but how you felt, what it meant, how it connected to other parts of your life. You write without stopping to edit. You write for yourself alone, with no intention of showing it to anyone. Pennebaker's original research and the replications that followed found consistent results. Participants reported significant reduction in intrusive thoughts about the event, reduced physiological markers of stress, improved immune function, fewer medical visits in the months following the protocol, and measurably improved psychological well-being, all from 4 20-minute writing sessions. The mechanism is understood. The act of constructing a narrative around a painful experience engages the prefrontal cortex, the brain's meaning-making center, which regulates the amygdala's emotional response and begins the process of filing the experience as resolved rather than open. Writing creates closure because it transforms raw, fragmented emotional material into a story with a beginning, middle, and a perspective. The letter that is never sent. A specific variation of expressive writing that addresses the closure gap, the apology, explanation, or recognition that was never received, is writing a letter to the person or situation involved. This letter is never sent. Its purpose is not communication. Its purpose is completion.
In this letter, you write everything you never said, the impact of what happened, what it cost you, what you needed that you did not receive, what you wish had been different. You write until there is nothing left unsaid. Then you close the letter, not with forgiveness if that is not where you are, but with a statement of finality. I have said what needed to be said. I am no longer waiting for your response. This technique has been used in clinical psychology settings for decades and is supported by the broader expressive writing literature. Its power is not metaphorical, it is neurological. The act of saying what was unsaid closes an open loop in the brain's processing of the event, even in the complete absence of any response from the other party. Practical step: run the 4-day protocol. Set aside 20 minutes for each of the next 4 consecutive days. Find a private space. Use a notebook or a document you do not share. Write about the experience that is most actively keeping you in the past: the loss, the betrayal, the failure, the grief. Write about your feelings, not the facts. Write without editing.
On the 4th day, after your writing session, write one final paragraph that begins, "I have now said everything about this that needs to be said. What this experience means to me now is," and complete the sentence with whatever is true for you in that moment. This final paragraph is the cognitive act of closure, the mind placing the final period on an open sentence. Chapter 3. Forgiveness as a tool, not a gift. The science of releasing resentment. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the entire landscape of psychological healing. It is misunderstood in a way that causes enormous harm, because the misunderstanding makes forgiveness seem either impossible or morally repugnant, and so people refuse it, and in refusing it, they condemn themselves to carry a weight that costs them more than it costs the person who caused the harm. The misunderstanding is this: that forgiveness is something you give to another person, that it requires the other person to deserve it, that it means what happened was acceptable, or that the relationship must be restored, or that you must feel warmly toward the person who hurt you.
None of that is what forgiveness is, not in the psychological literature and not in any practical framework that actually works. What forgiveness is, according to the research. Fred Luskin, director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project and one of the most cited researchers on forgiveness science, defines forgiveness as the decision to no longer allow another person's past actions to define your present emotional state. It is a change you make in yourself, for yourself, about how much power the other person's actions continue to have over your daily experience. Luskin's research at Stanford, conducted with groups including survivors of political violence in Northern Ireland and parents who had lost children to murder, produced consistent findings. People who practiced forgiveness as he defined it reported significant reductions in anger, hurt, and stress, significant improvements in vitality, hope, and physical health, and no correlation between forgiveness and condoning the behavior or reconciling with the person. Resentment, by contrast, is expensive. It activates the body's stress response every time it is rehearsed. Robert Enright, a developmental psychologist at the University of Wisconsin who has published extensively on forgiveness, documented the physical costs of chronic resentment.
elevated cortisol, increased cardiovascular risk, impaired immune function, disrupted sleep, and significantly higher rates of anxiety and depression. The resentment does not harm the person it is directed at. It harms the person carrying it. The grievance story. Luskin introduced the concept of the grievance story, the narrative a person constructs around a harm they experienced, which they then retell repeatedly to themselves and others, each retelling reinforcing the emotional charge of the original event. The grievance story is not a lie. What happened in it is real, but the story has become a fixed identity rather than a processed event. The person has organized their sense of self around the harm, and their emotional state, their worldview, their interpersonal behavior, and their future expectations are all filtered through it. Releasing the grievance story does not mean denying the harm. It means choosing not to let the harm be the organizing narrative of your present life. Practical step: the REACH protocol. Psychologist Everett Worthington developed a 5-step forgiveness protocol called REACH, which has been tested in randomized controlled trials and found to produce measurable reductions in unforgiveness and improvements in emotional well-being. R. Recall the hurt. Recall the event as accurately and as objectively as possible, neither minimizing it nor dramatizing it. See it clearly. Do not rehearse anger. Simply state to yourself what happened and what it cost you. E. Empathize. This is the step most people resist, and it is the most important. Try to understand, not excuse, but understand what was happening inside the person who hurt you. What were they afraid of? What did they lack? What unhealed wound were they acting from? This does not make their behavior acceptable. It makes them human, rather than a villain. And villains are much harder to release than flawed humans.
A. Altruistic gift. Recall a time when you did something that hurt someone else and were forgiven or needed forgiveness. Recall how that felt. Offer the same release to this person, not because they deserve it, but because you understand what it is to be imperfect and cause harm. C. Commit publicly. Write a statement, in your journal, in a letter to yourself, that you are choosing to release this person from the role of controlling your present emotional state. This is a commitment to yourself, not a communication to them. H. Hold on to forgiveness. Understand that the feeling of forgiveness will not be permanent initially. The old emotional response will resurface. When it does, return to your written commitment and remind yourself that you have already made this choice. The feeling follows the decision, not immediately, but consistently over time. Worthington's meta-analysis of forgiveness interventions found that structured protocols like REACH produce effect sizes significantly larger than simple advice to forgive across diverse populations and cultural contexts. Chapter 4. Rewriting the Story: How Narrative Identity Shapes Your Future. Every person carries a story about themselves, a narrative that connects the past to the present and extends into the future. This story answers the questions, who am I? How did I get here? And where am I going? Psychologists call this narrative identity, and the research on it is both fascinating and practically important for anyone trying to move forward from a difficult past. Dan McAdams, a Northwestern University psychologist who has spent his career studying narrative identity, found that the specific structure of the personal narrative a person carries, not just what happened, but how they organize and interpret what happened, is powerfully predictive of psychological well-being, resilience, and the quality of their future choices.
Contamination sequences and redemption sequences. McAdams identified two fundamental narrative patterns that appear repeatedly in life stories. He called them contamination sequences and redemption sequences. A contamination sequence is one in which a good or neutral period is followed by a bad event that permanently spoils it. I was happy until this happened. My life was on track until they came along. I had potential until I made that mistake. The narrative structure itself encodes the past as a ruination, a point after which things are permanently worse. A redemption sequence is the inverse, a bad or difficult period that leads through struggle to something meaningful. It was the hardest thing I have ever been through, and it showed me what I was made of. That loss changed what I valued. The failure redirected me towards something I would not have found otherwise. The narrative structure encodes difficulty as a turning point that produced growth, strength, or clarity.
McAdams' research found that people whose life stories are dominated by redemption sequences show significantly higher levels of psychological well-being, generativity, the desire to contribute to others, and resilience. People whose stories are dominated by contamination sequences show higher rates of depression, stagnation, and difficulty envisioning a meaningful future. The critical finding is that these narrative patterns are not fixed by what happened. They are constructed by how the person has chosen, consciously or unconsciously, to organize and interpret what happened, and they can be consciously reconstructed. Post-traumatic growth. This is not positive thinking. It is a documented psychological phenomenon called post-traumatic growth, first described by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina. Post-traumatic growth is not the absence of pain after a difficult experience. It is the emergence of new strength, perspective, or meaning that would not have developed without the experience. Tedeschi and Calhoun found it occurring across their research populations in 5 consistent domains: a greater appreciation for life, enhanced personal strength, openness to new possibilities, improved relationships, and spiritual or existential deepening. They found that post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic distress are not opposites. They frequently coexist. A person can be genuinely wounded by what happened and simultaneously find that the wounding changed them in ways that are, over time, profound and valuable. The growth does not cancel the pain. The pain does not negate the growth. What determines whether a person experiences post-traumatic growth is largely whether they engage in what Tedeschi and Calhoun call deliberate rumination, as opposed to the passive, distress-focused rumination discussed in Chapter 1. Deliberate rumination is an active, intentional attempt to make meaning from the experience. What does this tell me about myself? What has changed in how I see the world? What matters more now, and what matters less? Practical step: the narrative reconstruction exercise. This exercise is based directly on McAdams' narrative identity research and Tedeschi and Calhoun's work on deliberate meaning-making. Take the most significant, painful event from your past that is currently shaping your present. Write the story of that event in 2 versions. In the first version, write it as a contamination sequence: how it happened, what it destroyed or damaged, what it cost you, how it changed things for the worse. Be honest. Write this version fully. In the second version, write it as a redemption sequence. You do not change what happened. You change the lens. What did surviving it reveal about your capacity? What perspective did it give you that you could not have gotten otherwise? What did it redirect you toward? What did it strip away that, in retrospect, needed to go? What do you know now that you would not trade, even though you wish you had learned it differently? The second version is not a denial of the first. Both are true. But by consciously constructing the redemption narrative, you are building new neural associations with the memory, associations that encode it as formative rather than permanently damaging. Research on narrative therapy, developed by Michael White and David Epstein, has shown that this kind of deliberate restorying produces measurable shifts in emotional response to past events within weeks of consistent practice. Chapter 5. The body carries the past, releasing what the nervous system has stored. Much of what we call being stuck in the past is not located in the mind at all. It is located in the body, in the chronic tension held in the jaw, the shoulders, the chest, the gut, in the way breathing becomes shallow in certain rooms with certain people, in the restlessness, the hypervigilance, the difficulty feeling safe in the present moment, even when the present moment is objectively safe. After the original threat has passed, creating a physiological state that continuously echoes the past, even when the conscious mind is trying to move forward. The window of tolerance. Dan Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA,
Develop the concept of the window of tolerance to describe the band of arousal within which the nervous system can function effectively, processing information, regulating emotion, engaging with others, and making clear decisions. People who have experienced significant past pain or trauma frequently have a narrowed window of tolerance. Small stressors push them outside the window into hyperarousal, where they become anxious, reactive, flooded with emotion, or unable to think clearly, or into hypoarousal, where they shut down, dissociate, go numb, or cannot access motivation or feeling. These responses are not personality traits. They are nervous system adaptations from a time when the environment was genuinely threatening. The practical goal is not to eliminate these responses. That is not possible. The goal is to gradually widen the window through targeted physiological practices so that the nervous system can process more without being overwhelmed, and so that the body's echo of the past becomes quieter and less disruptive. Somatic regulation. 3 evidence-based practices. Practice 1. Extended exhale breathing. The autonomic nervous system has 2 branches, the sympathetic, which activates the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic, which produces rest, recovery, and calm. The exhale is controlled primarily by the parasympathetic branch. By deliberately extending the exhale beyond the inhale, you directly activate the parasympathetic system and begin to downregulate the stress response. The specific protocol, validated in research by the lab of Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, inhale through the nose for 4 counts, then take a second short sniff at the top of the inhale to fully inflate the lungs. Then exhale slowly through the mouth for 8 counts. 2 to 3 repetitions of this produce measurable reductions in heart rate and cortisol within 90 seconds. This is called the physiological sigh, and it is the fastest known method for shifting the nervous system from activation to calm.
Practice 2. Progressive muscle relaxation. Edmund Jacobson developed progressive muscle relaxation in the 1920s. It has since been tested in hundreds of clinical trials and is one of the most well-evidenced interventions for reducing physiological stress and the body tension associated with chronic emotional pain. The protocol? Systematically tense each major muscle group in the body for 7 seconds, then release for 30 seconds, moving from feet to legs to abdomen to chest to arms to face. The deliberate release following deliberate contraction activates the parasympathetic system and releases chronic holding patterns in the musculature. Practiced for 15 minutes daily for 4 weeks, it produces lasting reductions in baseline physiological arousal. Practice 3. Orienting. This is a practice from Peter Levine's somatic experiencing work and is grounded in the neurobiology of threat response. When the nervous system is activated by a memory or a trigger, it is oriented to the past, to the original threat. Orienting is the practice of deliberately redirecting the nervous system to the present environment. When you notice your body beginning to respond as if a past threat is present, slow down and deliberately look around the space you are in. Let your eyes move slowly across the room. Name objects. Notice colors, textures, distances. Orient your senses specifically to the present environment. This engages the ventral vagal branch of the parasympathetic system, the social and safety system, and sends the nervous system a clear signal. I am here. I am now. This is not that. Practical step. The daily body reset. Design a 10-minute daily practice that includes all 3 somatic tools. Begin with 3 physiological sighs. Move directly into 10 minutes of progressive muscle relaxation. Close with 2 minutes of slow, deliberate orienting. Eyes moving around the room, naming what you see and feel and hear in the present moment. Run this practice every day for 30 days, ideally at the same time each day, which associates the time of day with the parasympathetic state and makes the regulation automatic over time. Research on nervous system regulation consistently shows that the results are cumulative. Each session builds on the last, gradually raising the baseline of calm and gradually narrowing the gap between where you have been living and where you are trying to go.
Chapter 6. Rebuilding Forward: Goal Architecture and the Psychology of New Beginnings. Everything up to this point has been about releasing the grip of rumination, the weight of unfinished business, the cost of resentment, the structure of a limiting story, the tension stored in the body. This chapter turns the direction. It is about building, about the practical construction of a forward-facing life. Because letting go is only half of the process. The other half is having somewhere to go. A person who releases the past without building toward a future simply creates a vacuum, and vacuums are uncomfortable. The mind will fill them, often with more looking backward. The antidote to the pull of the past is not absence of pain. It is the pull of the future. The Fresh Start Effect. Heng-Chen Dai, Catherine Milkman, and Jason Reese published research in 2014 documenting what they called the Fresh Start Effect, a phenomenon in which people are significantly more likely to pursue behavioral change and new goals following temporal landmarks. New Year's, birthdays, the start of a new week, the anniversary of a significant event. These moments function as psychological dividers between past and present selves, making it easier for the brain to break from previous patterns and make new commitments. The mechanism is identity-based. Temporal landmarks allow people to relegate their past failures and behaviors to the previous period, to a past self, and to approach the new period with a cleaner slate. The behavioral change is driven not by any external change in circumstances, but by the internal reorganization of self-perception. You can create a fresh start landmark deliberately, at any point, for any reason. You do not need to wait for January 1st or your birthday. The research shows that the effect is driven by the psychological meaning assigned to the moment, not by the moment itself. An intentional declaration of a new beginning, documented in writing and acted upon immediately, activates the same psychological mechanism.
The science of goal architecture. Not all goals are created equal. Research by Gabrielle Oettingen at New York University has consistently shown that purely positive visualization, imagining the desired future in vivid detail, actually reduces motivation and achievement, rather than increasing it. The reason is counterintuitive. When the brain vividly imagines a desired outcome, it partially registers that state as already achieved, reducing the motivational energy to actually pursue it. Oettingen developed an alternative method, validated in multiple studies, called WOOP: Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. Wish. Define what you want with specific clarity. Not general improvement, a concrete, achievable goal in a defined timeframe. Outcome. Imagine the best possible result of achieving this wish. What would it feel, look, and mean? Engage this specifically. Obstacle. Now identify the single most significant internal obstacle, not external circumstance, but personal obstacle that could prevent you from achieving this. Fear, old habit, competing impulse, limiting belief. Be honest.
Plan. Create an if-then implementation intention. If the obstacle arises, and it will, then I will take this specific action. Research shows that if-then implementation intentions increase goal follow-through by 40 to 90% compared to goals without them, across a wide range of behavioral domains. WOOP is not motivational framing. It is a neurologically grounded planning structure that prepares the brain for the reality of the path, rather than the fantasy of the destination. Behavioral activation. Action precedes motivation. One of the most pervasive misconceptions about building a new life after releasing the past is that you must feel motivated before you can act. This inverts the actual psychological relationship between action and motivation. Behavioral activation, a well-evidenced treatment protocol originally developed for depression by researchers Neil Jacobson and Christopher Martell, is built on the opposite principle. Action precedes motivation. The feeling of motivation, energy, and engagement follows engagement in meaningful behavior. It does not precede it.
When a person has been living in the shadow of a painful past, motivation for new activities is often absent.
The familiar advice to wait until you feel ready, to act when you feel inspired, to begin when the time is right, is functionally a prescription for permanent stasis. The time never feels right. The motivation never arrives uninvited. The behavioral activation protocol is direct. Choose one specific activity per day that aligns with who you want to become, and do it regardless of whether you feel like doing it. Not a large activity, a small one. A 20-minute walk in a new direction. A conversation with someone who energizes rather than depletes you. A page of writing toward a goal. A skill practiced for one session. The activity itself generates the neurochemical conditions, dopamine, serotonin, engagement, that produce the feeling of motivation retrospectively. Practical step: the 90-day forward map. Using the WHOOP structure, define 3 goals for the next 90 days. One from your personal life, one from your professional or creative life, and one from your physical health. Apply the full WHOOP framework to each. Wish stated specifically, outcome imagined concretely, obstacle identified honestly, plan written as a specific if-then statement. Then, using behavioral activation, identify one small daily action that serves each of the 3 goals. Write these actions into your schedule as non-negotiable appointments. They should collectively take no more than 60 minutes per day. This is your 90-day forward map. It is not a vision board. It is a documented, structured commitment that harnesses both the fresh start effect and the neurological power of implementation intentions. Review it weekly, adjust as needed, but do not stop. Chapter 7. Sustained Forward Movement. Building the conditions for a life that does not look back. The final chapter is about maintenance, not in a passive sense, but in the sense of actively constructing the daily conditions that make forward movement the default rather than the exception. The work of the previous 6 chapters can be undone. Old patterns reassert themselves, especially under stress. The nervous system reverts. The grievance story resurfaces. The rumination loop reopens. This is not failure. It is the nature of deeply encoded patterns. The question is not how to make the work permanent after one pass. The question is how to build a daily life that continuously reinforces the new direction. Self-determination theory and intrinsic motivation, one of the most robust and widely cited frameworks in motivational psychology, through decades of research on what conditions allow humans to sustain engagement, growth, and well-being over time. Their research identified 3 fundamental psychological needs that must be consistently met for a person to sustain forward movement without burning out or reverting: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is the experience of acting from choice rather than obligation, of doing things because they align with your values and goals, not because external pressure demands it. When the actions you are taking toward your future feel externally imposed by what you think you should do, by other people's expectations, by guilt, motivation deteriorates rapidly. Competence is the experience of progressive mastery, of getting better at something that matters to you. Without it, the forward path feels directionless. With it, there is a momentum that is self-sustaining. Each improvement creates the conditions for the next. Relatedness is the experience of genuine connection with others, not transactional connection, but relationships in which you are seen, valued, and supported as you actually are, rather than as you were or as you fear you might be. Isolation is one of the strongest drivers of backward-looking psychology. Connection is one of the strongest drivers of forward movement. DC and Ryan's research showed that environments which support all 3 needs produce high levels of sustained intrinsic motivation and psychological well-being. Environments that undermine any of the 3 produce deterioration in motivation and a return to avoidance behaviors, including the avoidance strategy of living in the past rather than engaging with the challenges of the present. The relationship between present moment attention and forward movement. There is a direct neurological relationship between the capacity to be present in the current moment and the ability to build a meaningful future. This is not a philosophical observation. It is a finding from cognitive neuroscience.
Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert published research in Science in 2010 based on data from over 15,000 people across 80 countries, showing that the human mind wanders from the present moment approximately 47% of waking hours. Critically, they found that mind wandering, regardless of what the mind wanders to, including pleasant thoughts, is consistently associated with lower reported happiness than present moment attention. And the most common destination of the wandering mind is the past. Mindfulness-based training, the systematic practice of deliberately redirecting attention to the present moment without judgment, has been shown across hundreds of clinical trials to reduce the frequency and distress of past-oriented mind wandering, reduce rumination, and improve the quality of daily experience. It does not eliminate mind wandering, it changes the relationship with it. Instead of being pulled under by the past when the mind drifts, the practitioner notices the drift, names it without judgment, and returns.
This is a skill. It is trained through practice, not insight. The daily practice of returning your attention to the present moment, repeatedly, over weeks and months, changes the neural architecture. The role of meaning. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose work founded logotherapy, observed that human beings can endure almost any circumstance if they can find meaning in it, but that meaninglessness is itself a form of suffering that cannot be endured for long without deterioration for long. Research by Michael Stager at Colorado State University operationalized Frankl's observations into measurable terms. Stager found that the presence of meaning in life, the sense that one's life has significance, purpose, and coherence, is one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being, resilience after adversity, and sustained goal pursuit. It is also one of the strongest protective factors against depression. Meaning is not found, it is constructed. It is built through the activities you invest in, the relationships you cultivate, the contribution you make to something beyond yourself, and the narrative you construct that connects your past to your present and forward to a future worth moving toward. This is why all the previous work in this audiobook matters. The release of rumination clears the cognitive space to think clearly. The closure work removes the open files consuming your mental energy. The forgiveness work frees the emotional resources locked in resentment. The narrative reconstruction gives the past its proper place, not as a trap, but as context. The body work gives you access to the calm and presence required to build something real. And the goal architecture gives the forward direction a concrete shape. Together, they do not just move you away from the past, they move you toward a life built on your own terms, one that is, by virtue of the work you have done, more deliberate, more authentic, and more yours than it would have been without the difficulty that brought you here. Each morning, before your day begins, write 3 things in a notebook. This takes no more than 5 minutes. Anchor 1. What I am releasing today. One specific thought, emotion, grievance, or backward-facing mental pattern that you are consciously choosing not to carry into the day. Not a permanent declaration, just today. I am releasing the anger about the conversation last week. I am releasing the regret about the decision I made 3 years ago. I am releasing the comparison to where I thought I would be by now. Name it and set it down. Anchor 2. What I am building today. One specific, concrete action you will take today toward the life you are constructing. Not a general intention, a specific action. I will spend 20 minutes on the project. I will send the message I have been avoiding. I will take the walk I committed to. I will write the first page. Anchor 3. What I am grateful for today. One specific thing, not general gratitude, but a specific person, moment, capacity, or circumstance that is good and present in your life right now.
Robert Emmons' research at UC Davis on gratitude showed consistent findings across multiple studies. Daily gratitude practice measurably increases well-being, reduces the frequency of negative affect, and, most relevant here, shifts attentional orientation from deficit and loss toward presence and sufficiency.
It does not solve problems. It changes the lens through which you see what you have to work with. 3 sentences, 5 minutes, every morning. Not because of any single day's entry, but because of what 200 consecutive days of these 3 anchors builds. A mind that is, by practice rather than by accident, oriented toward release, construction, and presence. A final word. You have heard 7 chapters, 7 distinct mechanisms by which the past maintains its hold, and 7 research-grounded methods for loosening that hold and redirecting toward what is ahead. Let me briefly name them so they are clear.
You learned that the brain's grip on painful memories is neurological, not a character flaw, and that rumination extends pain rather than resolves it. You learned that closure is something you create internally through expressive writing, not something you wait for from another person. You learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give someone else. It is a physiological decision you make for yourself, and that the cost of not making it falls on you. You learned that the story you tell about your past is not fixed, that the same events can be encoded as contamination or as redemption, and that the structure you choose has direct consequences for your future. You learned that the body stores the past in physical patterns, and that somatic regulation practices can quiet that stored activation. You learned that motivation follows action rather than preceding it, and that goal architecture with specific implementation intentions dramatically increases the probability of actually doing what you intend to do. And you learned that daily practices, the 3 anchors, the body reset, present moment attention, are not supplementary extras. They are the maintenance structure that keeps the new direction stable under the inevitable pressure of a real life.
The past cannot be changed. This is one of the most difficult truths a human being must accept, and it is also, ultimately, one of the most liberating. What happened is finished. What you do with what happened, how you carry it, what you make of it, how you let it inform rather than imprison you, that is entirely and always yours to determine. The future is not a place you arrive at. It is something you build, one day at a time, with the choices made in the present moment. You have the tools. You have the knowledge. You have the only moment in which any of this can begin. Walk forward.